Good morning, this is Eric Kampmann and this is Sunrise, and we've been talking about the journey towards writing this book, which will be out in December, called Getting to Know Jesus. Now, yesterday I talked about the parable of the rich young ruler, and today I'm going to talk about the parable of the prodigal son. The prodigal son is a very famous parable that appears in Luke. It's the only time it's given, and it's the story of a young man who receives his inheritance and goes off to a foreign land and finds himself living high, eat, drink, and be merry, and suddenly he's impoverished. And ultimately, it dawns on him that he needs to go back and ask the forgiveness of his father. And he does that. In the meantime, the older son, who has stayed at home, is outraged by the fact that the father has embraced the younger son who's come back. And so the story itself kind of contrasts two different kinds of disobedience. The younger son's obvious. The older son is not so obvious because he is unforgiving, whereas the father is forever forgiving. Now, I always thought of myself as the older son. Now, and then somebody actually turned to me one day and said, in that story, you're the younger son. And the story of getting to know Jesus is, in fact, the story of what happens to the younger son once he's embraced by the father, is forgiven, and enters back into the family. In this case, it's obviously a sign of one of God's lost sheep being found by the shepherd. And that's what actually started me on a very different path than I had been on before. I had returned home. I had been forgiven. And the rest of the story is going to be the story of a man who changes direction, who follows a very different path, and becomes somebody who wants to honor God with his life. That it was not just all about me anymore. It was a much more complex relationship and a better one. This is Eric Kampmann, and this is Sunrise.